Okay, Sarah, what's tip number 4, please?
So tip number 4 is something I've kind of come to through the MA in Educational Neuroscience, when I've been thinking about how can we use neuroscience to help teachers. And this tip is that we want to use research on learning not as a prescription, but as a compass. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that your classroom is incredibly complex. So research in psychology, particularly in neuroscience, it quietens all of those conditions. It's not taking place in the classroom. It's taking place in a lab, often, not always, and it's done on materials like word pairs, which are very different to the kind of materials often that we use in classrooms. And there are lots of different things that make it kind of not as ecologically valid to kind of just translate it, transport it, I suppose, and just plop it into the classroom. So I think that whilst that's kind of demoralising sometimes, that we can't just get what we need out of this research, I think it's also really empowering, because we are the experts as teachers and teacher educators in our classrooms. We are the professionals and the experts, and we do the translation into the classroom. So research doesn't prescribe to us exactly what we should do. It can give us these kind of principles, these ideas, these heuristics that we can take and use in our classroom, but they're unlikely to be exactly how the researcher used it in the particular study, and they can kind of give us ideas about how it might work, but when we take it into classroom level, it acts as a kind of compass for us. It directs us to doing something, but it doesn't tell us exactly how to do it.
I think that's super, super smart advice, that, Sarah. I've certainly been guilty of this. I spoke about this before, how I never read research for 12 years, and then I started reading it. The first thing I read, I thought, well, this is the best thing I've ever read in my life. Just apply that left, right and centre, and then the more you read, the more you realise things contradict each other a bit. And as you say, if you dig into the experimental design, you think, well, this isn't the same as teaching quadratic equations to a year 9 on a Friday afternoon, and so on and so forth. Just two kind of follow-up questions, really. One is, do you have any examples of this, Sarah, either that you've seen when you've been working with teachers or so on, of where a teacher has taken essentially a research finding but then adapted it to make it work better for their class? Anything spring to mind with that?
I've seen it kind of. So one example is routines. So we have this general sense that routines are important, they're in a lot of the assessment frameworks for teachers, are that you need to have these routines, and I think if we understand what sits behind the benefit of routines, or lots of things sit behind the benefit of routines, but one thing in particular is if you've got good routines in your lessons, then it decreases the pupils' kind of cognitive load of all of that kind of stuff, so that they can focus on the hard stuff in your lessons, which is learning the content. So we're almost quietening all the the stuff that's handing things out and sitting down and what the task structure is going to be, but then we actually kind of can put in some harder stuff for them to focus on, and that means that when you go into lessons, you might see different routines kind of playing out differently for different teachers. There might be a bit of personality injected into different ways of doing the routines, but the teachers, they don't stray from the fact that routines are important, need to be in there wherever they should be there, they're there, and that they are kept the same every lesson. So I think that's a really easy one that you see. Another one which has kind of been taken to the extreme a little bit is retrieval practice. So I did my dissertation on retrieval practice. I'm a bit obsessed with it, but it's everybody quite rightly thinks it's a great thing to do. It's lots of benefits of retrieval. So we've kind of mandated these sort of retrieval practice starter activities at the beginning of lessons. And one of the things we need to recognise, I suppose, about retrieval practice is it does matter what you retrieve. It's not just 5 random questions, but what is the important knowledge in your subject? It takes a lot of understanding of your subject to set good retrieval practice questions. And I feel like that's got slightly lost under the idea that we should just do retrieval practice starter activities. So we want to really understand there some of the stuff on research that can act as a compass for us. So one of those is like, it matters what you retrieve. One of them is like, retrieval should be reasonably effortful. We need to balance effort and success. So we don't want to be getting them to retrieve stuff that's too easy. And we want to be using feedback. So if we've got these 5 retrieval practice things, but we're only spending 5 minutes on it, and Craig, I don't really have time to feed back to them, but I need to do retrieval practice, tick it off the list and move on, then what we're doing is we're using it as a, we're using it not even really as a prescription. We're sort of throwing it in there, but we need to use it we need to use the research as a compass. So understand the research in order to do the technique kind of properly.
Oh, this is fascinating. I'm going to ask you a terrible question. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Sarah. So this is really bad, but I'll just go for it anyway. I really like there that you've got kind of retrieval, and you've got a few kind of best bets is a phrase I often use, the kind of guiding principles that you think, I'm pretty sure that this is solid, and now it's up to the teacher to think what they can do to make that work in their lesson. So the fact, do retrieval first, make retrieval effortful, give feedback, they feel like pretty, best bets, and then it's up to the teacher to try and make them work. Same with the routines. Pretty good bet that having routines is a good thing. Now it's about how we try to translate that into the classroom. My terrible question is, do you have any more of these kind of things that you would consider to be pretty good bets that you would say to teachers, all right, over to you now, this is what the research says, over to you, can you make this work in your classroom?
Yeah, so another one which we know is really robust is spacing. Spacing stuff out rather than blocking. We're not 100% sure on the perfect schedule for spacing.
That's annoying, isn't it?
Yeah, but we never will be though, because it will depend on what your learners know and how quickly they forget it, which will depend on how you taught it, which will depend on what they know, and then it's all just a big mess, isn't it? But spacing it does seem like a good bet. Combining spacing and retrieval seems like a good bet. Spacing to the point where you think your learners are just going to be about to forget completely, but that's really hard to do. But yeah, spacing seems like a good one. I was just having a really great conversation with an expert on interleaving, and I think that is a really misunderstood, or certainly by me strategy. So he was fascinating on this, Craig. So he was saying, it's if you want to teach someone a concept and teach them like the boundaries of the concept, interleaving can be really good for saying like it's like this but it's not quite like this, and you're sort of that discrimination. But he made the point that like if we try to interleave at a macro level, like on a Monday we teach this topic, on a Tuesday we teach this topic, we're not getting that discrimination because they're on different days. So we've taken the research and we've gone, perhaps lethal mutation with it, rather than treating it as a compass to kind of guide us. So it seems like interleaving useful for discrimination and for getting, I'm sure you use this in maths, for getting during the practice stage where they have to apply different strategies to different questions. But at that macro level, he's not sure that there's that research that shows that it's gonna do the job.
That's fascinating. That my last question. Again, this isn't great either. You mentioned lethal mutation there. I was having a conversation. It'll come out the episode before this with Bradley Bush, who I think might have even been on your interleaving call because he was telling me he was going to be speaking to you as well. And Bradley, we were talking about research, and Bradley made a really interesting point that I'd never considered before. And he said that sometimes what we consider to be lethal mutations can actually turn out to be really positive things, because somebody may take the research, and all right, if you completely misinterpret the research, it's probably not going to be great. But if you take the research and perhaps think it's saying something, and you then try and apply that, and then it changes and stuff in your classroom, actually the result can be something that works, particularly well. So maybe because there's a danger in that you hear the phrase lethal mutation, and that says to me, okay, best practice is to stick to exactly what the research suggests I could do, so try and, create the conditions, and it never works. Whereas if we say, okay, you know what, exactly to say your phrase, let's use it as a compass, then maybe we get some of these mutations which aren't lethal, but which actually work really well for either your classroom context, or maybe even better, your school context, and so on and so forth. So not all mutations are lethal, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here.
I love that. I think that's great. Yeah.
I need a snappy phrase for it, though. I don't know what the opposite of a lethal mutation is. That's what I need to work
a
on.
non-lethal mutation.
Yeah, I need the
Craig.
I need the branding. I need the branding on this. All right, that's brilliant.